Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
Welcome back. It's our custom to go around and say our names. Is there anybody here again for the first time? Yeah, my name is Cass.
I'm Sal.
I'm Bob.
Jason.
Melissa.
David.
My name is Christian.
Prisha.
My name is Stephen.
Jack.
Steve. Richard. Peter.
Christopher.
Bill. Tim.
Rob.
Susan.
Greg.
Greg.
I'm Hal.
Daniel.
Paul.
Jay.
Don.
I'm George.
I'm Brad.
I'm Lee.
Jeff.
My name is Jerry.
Matthew.
I'm Clint.
I'm Larry.
John.
Michael.
Silas.
Great. So we've already met Charles, but let me just tell you a few things about Charles Halpern, our guest today. He's a lawyer, activist, author, educator, and meditation practitioner. He served as a founding dean of the CUNY School of Law and as a faculty member of prominent law schools across the country. A pioneer in public interest law, responsible for various entrepreneurial and educational initiatives that contributed to legal, academic, social justice, and contemplative communities. His book, Making Waves and Riding the Currents, Activism and the Practice of Wisdom, tells the story of how he brought public interest activism, mindfulness, and meditation into law schools and courthouses across the United States. In 2015, Charles, along with Daniel Carlin, launched Transforming Justice to bring mindfulness into criminal justice reform. The website for that is transformativejustice.net. So welcome, Charles Halpern.
Thank you, Cass. It's very nice to be here with you all. It's rather inspiring to see you all here on a Sunday morning, coming together to engage in your practice of Buddhist meditation. As I listened to that brief recitation of my checkered career, I realized that it's 40 years now since I undertook my meditation practice. It was while I was working at the City University of New York Law School, where I had been hired as their first dean to kind of reinvent what legal education might look like if the orientation was really towards serving the public interest, which is a challenge and opportunity I felt I couldn't pass up. But I think I underestimated the difficulties of that task. I didn't know much about the City University or really about what the reality of life in New York was. I had never lived there at that point. But it was a hard job, and I had a lot of competing pressures from state legislatures, from students, from parents who wanted to make sure that their students got in, an issue which we're all seeing a new perspective on. And I had a lot of pressure, but I didn't have the particular kind of pressure that, for example, the Yale soccer coach has. I had neither the pressure nor the opportunity, I might say. But a friend of mine who saw how this stress was wearing me down suggested that I might try meditation. And I had never meditated before, didn't know much about it, and was skeptical that 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 would do me much good with the kind of pressures I was under. But he was an experienced meditator. He had had a job similar to my own in another state, at another time. And he said, why don't you just try it? And I said, well, what do I do? And then he gave the kind of simple instructions I gave at the beginning of this session. You get up 15 minutes early in the morning, and you sit in a dignified, upright posture, and you watch your breath come and go. And when your mind wanders, you gently bring it back. No self-judgment, no self-criticism. He, being another type A lawyer like me, knew that self-judgment and self-criticism was kind of the sea we swam in. So there was so I said, it doesn't sound promising to me, but I'll give it a try. And I did, and my wife, Susan, who's here, encouraged me to do it by observing that this job was driving me crazy. And this seemed like a kind of a low-cost, low-input way to save my sanity and perhaps save our marriage. She wasn't explicit about that. But that was the subtext I found. So, I found, and my friend had warned me not to expect any miracles, and there were no miracles, but I did find that it was helpful, that I was less reactive when I would get a provocative phone call from the angry chancellor of the university saying that he had heard I had turned down a student who was whose father had a job that was very important to the welfare of the university. I didn't just blow up and tell him he'd have my letter of resignation. I took, because I had learned this practice of taking a few breaths. You pause and you reflect, go inward. And you have this slow breathing process which just automatically slows you down. And it was helpful to me. I got in less trouble than I would have otherwise. And I'm happy to say that law school is now approaching its 40th year of existence, which is pretty amazing. And I took the job before I realized that there had been a half dozen new law schools started around that time. It seemed like a growth period in the early 80s. And not one of those other deans had survived to hand out diplomas to the first graduating class. So that might have, I would have done it anyway, I suspect. And I handed out the diplomas, and as I said, the school is thriving. And one of the great benefits I got from it was this new practice which I learned. I went to some, at first I just did it in my own living room, for 15 minutes, just as he had said. But gradually I got drawn into other orbits and started going to retreats and became more engaged, and it became more important to me. And it became something much more than a way of dealing with stress. As I've suggested, it also was a way to do the job better. And it also, cultivating that habit of non-judgmental awareness, which is what we do for our half hour of meditation, is cultivate non-judgmental awareness. That's a great gift to carry through life. So it really was fabulous for me. At that time, this was not nearly as common a practice as it is now. Then I had another job. I was a foundation president for 10 years in the 90s, and that was a great job. I mean, there are a lot of people. There were a lot of people who wanted money from the foundation, a lot more than the money we had, but I did it, and one of the things I was able to do was to launch some things which supported mindfulness and contemplative practice, and that was great. You didn't have to give away a lot of money. It led to some conferences between the Dalai Lama and American scholars in psychology and religious studies. It was a wonderful opportunity. One thing we set up was a thing called the Center for Contemplative Mind in Society. Center for Contemplative Mind in Society. The idea being that this foundation was betting that promoting contemplative practice would have a general societal benefit. So, we don't have definitive results on that, but there's been a huge flowering since that. I think we set up the center probably in the early mid-90s. So in the 20 years it's been going, 25 years it's been going, it's helped to foster this blossoming of meditation practice throughout the country, in society, in various disciplines, in higher education, in K through 12 education, in the corporations, the number of corporations that recruit by talking about their meditation programs and the support they give through that is enormous. It's been so fully integrated into healthcare systems like Kaiser, for example. Almost the first thing they turn to if you go to Kaiser with a problem of pain or anxiety is mindfulness. They put you in one of their meditation groups. And so as meditation becomes a more common practice, it also means that there's more interest in the scientific community to find out what actually is going on in the brain when we sit in silence for 30 minutes. And now it happens, while this question is coming up, it also happens that in the scientific world there is technology to measure precisely what's happening in the brain while we're doing this practice. And you can see brain changes, for example, qualities of patience and non-judgmental acceptance. There are parts of the brain that are activated when those qualities emerge. And those qualities are drawn forward by, in the minds of meditators when they have stressful and other kinds of experiences. And my most recent work on this has been in San Jose, where I've been working with judges, prosecutors, and public defenders to try to bring mindfulness into courtrooms, into their work and into the courtroom, thinking that these qualities could improve the quality of justice. So it's become clear to me, and now to many other people, that mindfulness is not just sitting in silence and with predictable consequences in terms of reduction of stress. It's a lot more than that. In terms of process, the basic process of being present in a non-judgmental awareness with focus is a skill set that is especially good when bad things are happening. Yeah, I mean, that's why that's what drew me to it. But it has obvious benefits if bad things are happening. If one person in a highly conflicted group is taking a step back and is breathing and looking around without making judgments and placing blame on self or others, if one person's doing that, it can change the dynamic in the whole room. And this quality we have of not getting lost in the future. We don't get drawn into the future by either anticipating things that we hope will happen or dreading things that we're afraid will happen. That's also a very helpful skill, particularly in unstable times like what we're in now. I want to come back to this, because what I want to say is a few things about the instability of these times and how these mindfulness qualities and values can be extremely important. Among the values and qualities which I think are so important are compassion for ourselves and for others, including not just our immediate circle, but everyone, to have a kind of a general sense of compassion for all beings. That is, all human beings and also all other living beings. We have and this is related to a quality of equanimity and balance. Our meditation practice helps us to keep a balance. That's not in every situation, but it's helpful to us in dealing with challenging situations. And it also helps to support the courage to act. Once we understand a situation and we feel that some kind of strong action is needed, we're able to respond. Now, this is particularly important. It's something that I've been thinking about a lot in recent months, and that is the challenge of global climate disruption. And I'd like to spend a few minutes talking about that and talking about what we practitioners of mindfulness might be able to do in what is a global crisis, not one that might happen sometime in the future, that is happening now. And it's clear it's going to get worse. The question is, how much worse is it going to get, and how well can we limit the destruction? You probably have all seen these numbers that say that we've now we've gained 1% Celsius over when these measurements started. I think probably 1970 or 1980. And the question is, how high is global temperature going to go, and how quickly? Because the higher it goes and the more quickly it goes, the more destructive it is to the Earth, to human society, and to each of our lives. And the way that the mainstream scientists in the United States and around the world are talking now, the worst case scenario is the extinction of the human species within 50 years. So suddenly the time frame is much shorter. There's no guarantee. Nobody knows exactly what's going to happen or when it's going to happen. We are already in conditions on Earth that have not existed for hundreds of thousands of years, long before humans were on the Earth. So the worst case, some people are paralyzed by these predictions. It's just unimaginable, and they think that they're so small and their efforts would be so small, they're not going to do anything. Or they're going to worry about it a little, but not do anything. And then there are some people who simply deny the reality of this. Our president is kind of the leader of that school of thought right now. But he's far from alone. And they don't believe in science. He is not persuaded by science. He's not persuaded by facts. He's not interested in truth, in my opinion. Some others may disagree, but that's my sense of kind of the way he approaches this problem. So if you tell him there's a scientific consensus, he says, well, what's that mean to me? He has more elegant and earthier ways of saying that than I do, but I think that's the heart of it. Now, first of all, I want to emphasize that this is really happening now. Just as a few examples from the recent news, you've probably seen it, but Mozambique, far from where we are, far from our concerns, but still a place where millions of people live and are dying, had the worst cyclones hit in the last few weeks ever in recorded history. Now this is consistent with the kind of extreme weather conditions that we Californians are very familiar with, which are changing so dramatically during our own lifetimes. People who've lived here for a long time say, we never had this kind of heat. We never had, well, of course the wildfires are now hotter than they've ever been. So we're in the middle of that. In Mozambique, 800 people were killed, 100,000 houses were lost, which means if you figure it's 5 people in each house, that means 500,000 people in an extremely poor country are without housing. And the weather is continuing to be impossible. These cyclones hit at the beginning of the growing season, so an entire year's crops were destroyed. They can't be replanted. So we're talking about the likelihood of a humanitarian crisis in which tens of thousands of people will die of malnutrition or starvation. And it'll call on a kind of the kind of global effort to deal with this humanitarian crisis that just seems unimaginable in the world today as it is. Susan and I had just watched one of those Richard Attenborough Planet Earth films on television. You know the series he's doing. And perhaps the most moving episode we saw was pictures of the emperor penguins in Antarctica. These emperor penguins are about this big, they weigh 88 pounds, and they live for 4 months of the year in total darkness. And at the beginning of that period, the females lay the eggs, and for the next 4 months, each of the males, the parents, which have kind of long, floppy fur coats, they put an egg on top of their feet, and they flop this fur over so the egg is kept warm and protected. And for 4 months, these dedicated, so I'm sure there's some dedicated fathers in this room, but the dedication of these penguins is so amazing. And it's such a, it's just beautiful, this picture of them. And then you see the sun peaks up after 4 months of darkness, and the young are born, and they go out onto the ice, and they get fledged, and there's a whole, they do what they've been doing for millions of years, generation after generation. This last week, we just seen this thing, and we're so touched by it, you know, these amazing animals. And this last week, there was a big news story that in one of the 2 places in Antarctica, which has the largest populations of these emperor penguins, Halley Bay, which had between 15,000 and 24,000 breeding pairs. So that you'd expect to have 15 to 24,000 babies each year. In the last 3 years, there were virtually none. 2 years, there were none. And in 1 year, there were a few. So, and the reason is that the ice, it's warmer, so the ice melts too soon. That is, the ice that's between the big solid ice and the sea melts too soon. The birds can't do what they've been doing for millennia. The babies go out there and they get fed and they grow. They die instead. So now that's you might say, well, what the hell, you know? But to me, it was just extremely moving because of the connection we feel to all beings, partly from what you know, saying this language that is so core to the Buddhist practice of all of our connection and our interrelationship with all sentient beings. And I think the reason Attenborough has that story in there and gives it 15 minutes is because it's so beautiful and it's so moving and it touches us in a certain kind of way. And what happens when we lose those stories? That's not nothing. That's not in the world unconnected to us. And our practice has helped us to see the connection between us and those penguins. And then, of course, you probably, as we, have had people who are directly affected by the fires in Ventura and in Paradise throughout Sonoma County. I mean, people who, in our experience, people barely escaped with their lives. Some lost their houses and some didn't. And we never had that experience before. And so that has helped to bring us awake to this, because we were in that category of people who believe the science. I'm not a scientist. I don't have a depth of understanding. But basically, I believe in it. We have this kind of consensus and this kind of ratification. You know, scientists were talking this way 40 years ago, 50 years ago. But I think, well, then, it was 50 years ago. But it's here. It's not speculation about what's going to happen. And there's also this idea that we do have a window, which is closing quickly, in which we can mitigate things. Population on Earth, since I've been on Earth, has grown, I think, from something like just over 2 billion to just under 8 billion. So that's in my lifetime. And it is an unsustainable growth rate, and you know, if nothing's done about it, the curve goes almost vertical. So something has to be done, or the life will be unimaginable. One of the things that brought this home to me was a conversation I had with my oldest grandson, who's 22. And he said, "It looks like I'll never have a child." And there are a lot of young people, like that young woman from Sweden, I think Sweden, who came here and said, you know, I don't want to hear any debate about why it's impossible to do anything. This is my life that you people are giving away, and it's not acceptable. She just came and spoke in Congress. And so, I want to make one other point about the environmental breakdown, and that's its relationship to the breakdown of human systems. One of the things, you know, it's too often talked about the global warming crisis. But it's not just the global warming crisis, because if the temperature levels go up to, I think it's up to 4 degrees centigrade by 2100, life on Earth is not sustainable. So that's not just discomfort. That means that's the end of human civilization. You know, maybe it's 100 years past that, or you know, who knows? But those are the stakes we're playing for. And when you think of that going on, you're talking about the destruction of wholesome human systems. First of all, the global crisis in democracy and the health of democratic institutions, which we're witnessing now all over the place, from Venezuela to Brazil to Hungary to Sri Lanka. We're watching democracies crumble, and we're watching a turn toward authoritarian governments. The immigration crisis, looking at Brexit and what caused Brexit, and this huge flow of immigrants into Europe, and the huge flow north from South America into this country. This is just a tip of an iceberg, if I can use. So long as we still have icebergs. You know, we all know what we mean by a tip of an iceberg. But think of what it's going to be like when food is even more scarce, where drinkable water is in even shorter supply. Think of what the flow from the southern hemisphere is going to be to the northern hemisphere. What are we going to do about that? What are we going to have to turn ourselves into if we don't want to do things? How can we prepare for it? By the way, if you haven't seen The Jungle, a play about immigration at the Current Theater currently, I really encourage you to go. We saw it the other night, and it is kind of a life-changing experience to go to that theater, because it really gets at what the immigration crisis is really about for human beings. And it's a reminder, again, why we really have to take this crisis of the global environment very seriously. Now, I'd just like to say a couple of things before I open this up for questions and comments, which we still have a little time for if any of you want to respond or ask questions. I think that mindfulness, it should be part of the toolkit of everybody who's going to be living through this transition. Just to live through it. This is a wonderful kind of grounding. More importantly, it gives us the capacity to really take a leadership role in dealing with it. Well, what can we do? We can do simple things, of course, like change the light bulbs we use and think about an electric car instead of a big gas guzzler. Those are obvious things. They are, and if everyone had done those 50 years ago, that would have been enough to turn things. Not to deal fully with the problem, but it would. At this point, they're important to do. They're useful because every tenth of a degree that we can hold the temperature down means millions of lives and changes in the qualities of lives for people and for the other living beings we share with. So those things are worth doing. But we've got to change the whole framework in which we deal with the issue. We can't deal with this as kind of another problem we all have to do a little something about. It really has to be a global mobilization that is comparable to the mobilization that countries went through in preparing for World War II. In which we say that this is the number one thing on our plate, and we are asking everybody to do what's needed to change their lives. Now, I think we're people who are very well equipped with compassion, with the capacity to focus on the present moment, to look at the future and take it in without being paralyzed or just shattered by anxiety. So I think that we have an opportunity and a duty. And I am hopeful that those of us who have this experience will move forward and try to do what we can. For example, I as a lawyer am asking myself, why are law schools and court systems not dealing with this question about how is justice going to be administered 25 years from now, when conditions aren't so good, when we have electric disturbances that are putting systems out of use. Our courts on the border are already overwhelmed. Well, what are we going to do when we've got 5 times or 10 times the number of people coming up in the most extreme conditions of poverty and illness and despair? We should be thinking about that. What are public health schools? I haven't heard about this. It doesn't get that kind of visibility and attention. Nobody's treating this like what William James phrased, the moral equivalent of war. That we've got this is morally equivalent. It makes the same demands on us. Well, we are going to have a set of skills which will keep us from freaking out or make our freakouts less. But we can be people who take a leadership position when everybody around us is just panicking. The fact that we are grounded in our practice and are able to breathe deeply and look for a just and compassionate solution for whatever problem we're dealing with at a particular moment, that's a huge asset. It's a huge gift we can give to the world. And our practice, I think, is as good a thing as we can do to help us to play a creative role in these challenging times we have ahead. Sorry not to have a cheerier note to end on, but I think that is where we are, and I think it is not a hopeless situation. It's a situation where people who really are willing, who have the capacity to address it and look at what needs to be done, will have a great gift to give to the world. Any comments or questions?
I'm curious about the transformative justice work that you're doing, and I take it it's not a situation where everybody involved in court cases will meditate together before starting. But is it kind of all focused on individuals learning this practice themselves, or is there something that happens on a collective level?
Well, I think my feeling is that meditation practice is best, as solitary a practice as it is, it happens best in community. Often we do our practice with our eyes shut and silent, but still community is extremely important. So what we tried in San Jose was to get groups of judges together. We would meet with them and give them basic instructions. They would practice on their own, they practiced in small groups, and similarly public defenders and prosecutors. And the hope and expectation is that these qualities of groundedness and awareness and compassion will start to infuse their work. And what we have in mind someday is thinking of what does a mindful courtroom look like? And we haven't gotten there yet. But when you have, one reason we did this in San Jose with these 3 different groups, because they have a lot to say about how the criminal justice system works. And if you've got in one courtroom a judge who is practicing this, and a prosecutor, and a defense counsel, and each of them has their own sworn responsibilities to a client or to the prosecutor to see that crimes are punished, the judge to assure that justice is done. If they're all doing that in the framework of mindfulness, that I think has real potential. Currently we in California have a criminal justice system which is a global disgrace. We have tens of thousands of people doing life sentences. And it's completely unjustifiable. And there was an article in the New York Times, was it today or yesterday, that says that we're now planning on letting the people who we are holding in Guantanamo, people who have never been tried, never been found guilty of anything, in a public forum. The plan now is to let them die there in place. They're not there. There's no plan to release. Statistically, people our age, or most of our age, so I see some people who aren't our age, but people over 40 don't commit crimes. It's a different thing, and we're letting these people rot.
It seems like that sounds like a great idea, but have you tried to include law enforcement? It seems like
Yes.
would need to.
My partner is the head of the Center for Public Safety, and what he does is he works with prison guards. He works with prison guards. He works with cops on the beat, and the results are very promising. There's another guy in Oregon who runs programs to train police departments. He's a policeman in Portland, I think, in Oregon or something, and they think it's really a way to change the nature of policing.
Well, I think lurking behind these problems is something very endemic to our times, which is corporate capitalism, both in terms of prisons for profit and the oil and gas companies and other corporations that stand in the way of doing anything. What is our response to that?
Well, I have two. It's a big. I agree with you. It's a big. You're pointing to a very big issue. There are two things that I think. One is I take pleasure in the fact that so many corporations are training their executives and their workers in mindfulness practice. It's not going to cure things. You still have a bunch of incentives which are non-mindful. But once you've got mindful executives in a place, they start thinking about how, they start having more compassion for people who are working at the minimum wage, and so that's one thing that's hopeful. The other thing that I think is hopeful is that we return to what was one of the great inventions of the Roosevelt era, in the 30s. Oh, that's my phone. I thought I turned it off, but I just turned it on buzz. And that is the idea of federal regulation, government regulation, to make sure that corporations and businesses generally are meeting some minimum level of social responsibility and good behavior. So those are things which are at the moment, and you know, socialism is no longer a dirty word for many people, and so I think, and you know, this, one of the good sides, it's hard to find a good side in the story of environmental disruption. You know, it is the disaster of disasters. But one of the good sides is that people will be creative, and they will say, you know, maybe it isn't right for the CEO to be earning 10,000 times what the lowest paid worker is. It wasn't okay when I was practicing law in the 70s. That was unacceptable. Now it's so maybe one good thing is that these questions, which have been answered in such destructive ways, will be reopened and answered in a more mindful way. Thank you for the question.
Last question.
So I'd like to suggest a conjunction between some of the legal issues and the other things that might. So one of the proclivities when there's a problem is to phrase it as who is to blame, whether it's humans or groups, Republicans, corporations, capitalism, communism, whatever. And those may be relevant, and even about climate change. So for so long, the denial issue has been about whether it's human caused or not. So what does that really matter for our welfare? And in fact, the Earth has had ups and downs in the past. Maybe it's the core of the planet, but nevertheless, it's a problem. And I think that causes a diversion of energy and effort from, is there a problem, dealing with the problem, to what we have to do is find the bad guys or the bad organization or the bad tribe or the bad nation or the bad leader, and preferably, and then all will be well.
Thank you for that. I want to say two things. One is, if you look into the Buddhist contemplative response possibilities, two of them seem directly relevant. One is blaming. Blaming is never encouraged in the Buddhist world, and that's a good thing. And you know, if we're going to stop blaming, the first thing we have to do is stop blaming ourselves. You know, we can't become accepting, non-judgmental people unless we give ourselves that benefit. I think that's got to come first. But so that's one thing. The other principle is their principle of interconnection, but what Thich Nhat Hanh calls interbeing, that we're all connected to each other, and we can't succeed if they don't succeed. He has a very elaborate way of talking about this, and I think that's another. If we could get those two ideas out into the world, we would be starting to address the problem you're talking about. Thank you all.
Thank you. Again, the website is transformativejustice.net. Your website?
No, that's not actually.
Oh.
No, and actually, it occurred to me that I've been doing quite a lot of reading that connects the global crisis with a mindful approach. And if anyone's interested in seeing that, I could just put it on online as a just kind of a reading list that people might be interested in that. Because there's some very wise and thoughtful people working on this stuff from the Buddhist angle. Well, where would I post that?
I'll talk to you after we close.
Oh, fine, and you can pass the word around.
Right.
Good.
Yeah, we have a we have a Yahoo group, and
Good email it to
and a
me.
Facebook page.
Oh, well, I'll send it to both of you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Please stay and enjoy the Fellowship of the Sangha. We have hot water for tea, and there's some vegan treats. I'll be going around with the donut bowl. And Donna sustains our Sangha. It's used for the rent, for Larkin Street dinners, and for honorary for our speakers and teachers, and to pay for the newsletter, which largely goes to prisoners, actually, or people who are incarcerated. Some people gather at the front door for lunch at about 12:30. Everybody's welcome to join that. There's a sign-up sheet to get on our emailing list over on the credenza. And any other announcements? Yes.
Next Sunday the first Sunday of the month? We have our monthly book group, Radical Dharma Study Group, and if you're interested in immigration and white supremacy and its interface with Theravada Buddhism, and how and you want to learn more about what probably the Buddhist practice that you're practicing and how it got here from Burma. This is a great session. The reading's probably about 35 pages, but it's pretty dense, but you could do it in a week. I would really encourage you to be a part of it. We meet at 1 to 3 after Sangha next Sunday. So if you're curious, you could talk to me, but the information's been sent out on the Yahoo group, but I'll do it again in the next 24 hours. But I really encourage people to consider joining us for this particular one. Thank you.
Speaking of next week, our speaker next week will be Kevin Griffin, a teacher for over 2 decades and the author of One Breath at a Time, Buddhism and the 12 Steps. So could we gather for this dedication of merit? By the power and truth of this practice, may all beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all be free from sorrow and the causes of sorrow. May all never be separated from the sacred happiness which is without sorrow. And may all live in equanimity, without too much attachment or too much aversion, believing in the equality of all that lives.
Thank you for listening to the Gay Buddhist Forum. If you would like to hear several new talks per month and be notified of upcoming speakers so you can participate live, please subscribe to this podcast, like us on Facebook, and join our mailing list by visiting gaybuddhist.org.